Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Tour. I'm Jake, and with me, as usual, is Luke. How are you?
Hey Jake, I'm well. It's been a massive couple of days with the US Open. Also had a big day today out on site at Royal Queensland Golf Course, actually having a look at the land that they're going to develop into the new short course, working with OCM Design on that. So it was good to actually see it firsthand in the area that they're going to be really starting to work on in the next 18 months or so.
Was that an invitation for members, or are you part of a committee there? Or
No, it's a little bit of business. Probably not much I can talk about at the moment, but hopefully we might have a little part to play in what goes on there.
Very nice. I'm just preparing for the last minute pre-holiday rush. So today was busy, but it always is. I think you can't get away with it when you're trying to get away on holidays. So it's annoying.
Yeah, we got a bit jammed with technical issues doing this late night recording now before you go away. So hopefully we've got the energy.
Yes. Now, huge weekend of action with Bryson winning the US Open. That was probably the best major I've seen since Tiger's 19 Masters, really.
Yeah, I would say probably the best major since Smithy won the Open, but it was just a ball terror of an event and so much for us to unpack. It's hard to know where to start, but it was just a sensational few days there at Pinehurst.
I guess the common denominator between 22 and this particular one was Rory McIlroy. In the 22, he was run down by a raging Cam Smith. It was opposite this event. McIlroy playing incredibly well. I think when he stepped onto the 16th tee box, he was 4 under and had overtaken Bryson, who was 2 shots up. Messaged a mate of mine. He'd asked who was winning this. So I'm like, no one's catching Rory the way he's playing and the way Bryson was playing, but what unfolded next was incredible.
You wouldn't have believed it really if someone had told you how it was going to unfold. And even with Rory in the clubhouse where Bryson was on 18, you still probably would have had your money on Rory taking it out, but not to be, and another devastating loss, another devastating bridesmaid result for Rory in a major.
Who do we speak about first? Do we speak about Bryson or do we focus on Rory?
I think we've got to speak about Bryson because he is undoubtedly the story. Of course, Rory's disappointment is a very strong subplot to it all. But what we've seen of Bryson, both in the tournament and post-tournament, I think is where we need to start.
So for 3 days, he was incredible. He drove it really well for 3 days. His short game and putting, obviously putting is pretty vastly improved. His short game was very good. Strokes gains wise, it wasn't incredible. He wasn't right at the top there, but the short game with those longer wedges is something he seemed to have always struggled with. So it was good to see the way he tackled this course because I didn't anticipate him playing well.
No, we talked about him in our preview pod last week and we were a bit iffy about the form that he'd shown coming in out of the Texas event for LIV, but he just absolutely brought his A game. He was playing sensible golf in terms of where he was leaving himself in particular spots, and when he did get out of position, his ability to hit the chip shots on those tight Bermuda surrounds of the greens was just really special. I think Brandel was talking about it on the coverage, how he was hitting these sort of driving hook chips and just generating an enormous amount of spin despite the steep attack angle and the slick greens that were there. So it was definitely a standout, particularly on day 4 where he was in some very treacherous positions around the greens, but was able to make really remarkable up and downs and keep his round together and not get too far out of touch as Rory was charging in the final day.
His up and down on 8 I thought was really good. That was a very tough shot. He was short-sighted, well below the putting surface. That up and down was incredible. Obviously, a bunker shot on 18, although we saw Johnson Wagner enter it a few hours later, is a shot that I think Lou Stagman might have mentioned. It was maybe a 3 or 4% chance of getting it closer than what Bryson did. It was an incredible way, particularly under all that pressure, to clinch the victory.
I think Bryson himself said that is an up and down that he might make 3 or 4 times out of 100. So it was an incredible shot in the circumstances under enormous pressure. The shot that not only gives amateur golfers nightmares, but even professional golfers, that 55, 60-yard bunker shot, and he just exploded it out there. Still had a reasonable amount of spin on it. It trundled up towards that hole and gave himself 3 foot 10 inches for the win. And unlike Rory before him, was just able to make that putt. And he did look rock solid on those sort of short putts all the way through the tournament at Pinehurst, and was able to deliver there on the biggest of stages.
I think probably what shone through for me compared to the Masters a few tournaments earlier was his composure when things weren't going his way. He seemed to get overwhelmed a little bit in that final round at the Masters. It's got a little bit upset when things outside of his control, or in his control as well, when luck didn't favour him, he seemed to lose it a little bit. And that was one of the big question marks I had over him, contending in these sort of really difficult conditions. But he showed without his best off the tee that he was able to maintain his composure, and playing out of the rough pretty much all day. He played some really good sort of recovery shots and in and around the green.
His native areas were prominent for Bryson in the final round because his driving accuracy was way down. He was 50th or 60th in driving accuracy, despite being, I think, top 2 in driving length, up there with Rory. But wasn't without his challenges in the native area. I think if you listen to Brandel on the coverage, he was saying that Bryson continued to get lucky, but that wasn't the case. He did certainly have his fair share of trouble with his second shots because he was leaving himself in precarious positions in the native area and confronting the wiregrass and the sandy lies that were in the waste areas. So he grinded, as you say. He showed a level of maturity and composure that he hasn't necessarily done in other instances where he's been a real contender. And we did talk about this last week. He's a much more mature golfer now. He's a more well-rounded golfer. And it was great to see him be able to close it out and secure his second US Open.
He spoke really well in the media centre afterwards. He acknowledged Rory and felt for him a little bit. And then scenes after the trophy presentation, he was certainly the crowd favourite, wasn't he?
I think he was the crowd favourite all the way through the tournament as well, although there was very strong support for Rory too. It felt Ryder Cup-ish final day with the USA chants and then the retorting chants for Rory. So he definitely had the crowd support though, and to his credit, I think he's been able to turn a lot of supporters around from people that probably were detractors or maybe not supporters of his to really locking in behind him when he was at Pinehurst. So he's been very good with the fans as well, very engaging. We've seen a number of clips. There was the one there where he signed the cap of the disabled fellow who was around the green there. I think Rory had given him a ball, and then Bryson went one further and signed his cap and gave him the big high five and was really engaging there. I think when he stepped onto the 13th tee, he was asking the crowd, or discussing partially with the crowd, whether he should pull the big stick, pull driver, and go for the green. And so it was very interesting to see him do that. But just while we're talking about Bryson and the driver, it was quite perplexing to me, or strange to me, to see him on the range before the final round kicked off to make a change to the driver head, the head that he'd been using the previous 3 days that had given him a 3-stroke advantage. But I guess that's the nature of Bryson. He likes to push the limits, and he's a risk taker. And in the end, despite only hitting sort of 5 of 14 fairways in the final round, he was still able to come away victorious.
He noted that in the press conference afterwards, that was probably the wrong decision, but to change out the driver there. I don't think there was anything wrong with the previous driver. It was just that he had maybe hit it quite a lot. And being Bryson, I think he likes to change out the driver every sort of 200, 300 shots, which is crazy to think about.
There was talk of it flattening out, whatever that means. I guess something to do with the twist in the face of it being not at the degrees or the angles that he was looking for. That he's certainly still got that quirkiness about him, which people are warming more up to than what they have in the past.
There's some discussion around whether or not it's authentic or if it's a little bit manufactured. From my perspective, I don't think it really matters because they're all on show. And I think it was just, given how quick he was able to turn around his public image, I think it's good because he's, as you said, he's engaging with fans. He's getting people on their side. He's entertaining, which not many professional golfers do. Noting at LIV Adelaide on the range, which you would have seen as well, whenever Bryson entered the range, the first thing he would do is go up and find a kid or two to give a glove or sign some autographs before heading off to start his warm-up. And he was one of the only golfers there that was doing that. So he's made a conscious effort to engage a fan, and I can see why his image has turned around. But people like Brandel was riding him all tournament. He's not
riding him.
Oh, absolutely. Like, he's not a fan at all. And then sort of discussion from like NLU Trons thinks it's quite manufactured. And as I said, I don't know if it's an issue or not.
I'd be interested to know whether those detractors that sort of are saying he's phony and a malcontent have actually seen him live, particularly at a LIV event, because when we saw him down in Adelaide in the flesh and playing live and engaging with the crowd, it certainly didn't have any air of being manufactured or a stage act. So I'm taking it at face value with Bryson. I've said before that I've done a full 180 on Bryson, and I was a detractor or someone that was actively rooting against him in the past, and he's been able to turn me right around. And so, as I say, I'm taking it at face value. I think he is genuine. I think he's loving being in the spotlight the way that he is. Not necessarily to be the center of attention, but I think he is enjoying that attention, and what he's getting out of that, he's trying to give back to the fans and even back to the media. You talked about Johnson Wagner before. That was in the dark. Like, most major champions are off with their entourage, and they're nowhere near the course by the time Bryson went up to Johnson Wagner. And then to get in the bunker with him, coach him through that shot, and then share a moment, both holding the trophy together. I just think that was great stuff.
It was really good. I think one big thing that sort of allows a lot of leeway is playing really good golf. It's going to be interesting to see if he lapses in form a little bit, to see how the coverage of him potentially changes. Because, I think probably the most important thing is if you're playing incredible golf, you get a lot of leeway with fans and with the media as well.
It's a very fickle environment, and as soon as your form starts to slump, or it doesn't even have to be a slump, it just needs to be not achieving the results that the establishment expect you to achieve, they do turn very quickly. And Jon Rahm's the best case in point for me on that, where his results on LIV have not been bad. He just hasn't won. He's been very competitive. He had two majors that he probably would have liked to have done better in at the Masters and the PGA, but that doesn't mean that he's a forgotten golfer now. He's still one of the best golfers in the world, but you just see how the commentariat turns very quickly against you.
Hey, Bryson is now the 10th best golfer in the planet.
And not good enough to make the Olympics either.
Yeah,
but last year's US champion, who's been in stinky form lately, is.
It's a little bit of an indictment on some of those players in that top 10, or maybe even lower than top 10, because Bryson's had 10 counting tournaments. There's a minimum divisor of 40 tournaments, which most of the top 10, 20 hit. There's a few. Berger's got 30. I think Scheffler might have played. Oh, no, it might have been Rahm, actually. It has 35 events. Bryson's results have essentially been quartered. and he's still sitting in 10th place. So he's in a real sort of purple patch of form in those counting events, those majors.
Where do you think he sits? Is he top 5? Is he top 3?
On current form, you'd have to put him probably in between Xander and Scotty, really.
You'd think he's comfortably top 5, arguably top 3. But he's certainly playing the style of golf that you would think the US would want to see at the Olympics. The US is obviously blessed with or their sport with riches to choose from in terms of the golfers that they take. So they'll probably still do very well regardless of who goes in the team. It's very hard to say that Bryson wouldn't be in the top 4 American golfers right now.
He's in really good form, really good. Now, switching across to Rory, he was seen, the scenes after he missed that putt on 18 and the scoring tent, watching Bryson, he looked like he really rued what could have been. And he left and hopped in the car and left before even congratulating Bryson before confronting the media. So he was obviously really hurting. What did you make of all of that?
Firstly, I thought it was incredible footage to get of him in the scorer's hut there as he was watching on. And I think you could really tell just how gutted he was in that reaction in the room there. And it was hard not to feel for him in that moment. And I think to me, it signified that he really felt he had that one in the bag. And to see it slip through his fingers was just a very gutting situation for him. In terms of hightailing it out of there and not hanging around to at least shake Bryson's hand and give him congratulations following the victory, I think that was poor form from Rory. He probably regrets it now. I know he's issued a statement earlier today where he said that Bryson's a great champion and he's just what golf needs right at this moment. I think a little bit too late on that one. You look at some of the other golfers who've suffered significant major heartbreak, particularly the likes of Norman. They've hung around and they've congratulated the ultimate winner despite how they may have been feeling. So I thought that was pretty poor form from Rory, but we've seen that Rory's he runs hot things, and there's been a number of these instances now where we had the shirt ripping incident, we had the massive blow up in the car park at Bones during the Ryder Cup last year, and now this instance where clearly he wasn't very happy and sped out of the car park there. So not draping himself in a whole heap of glory or portraying that he's a particularly good loser.
Yeah, out of all his close calls, this one looked like it hurt the most because, as I mentioned earlier, he was playing incredibly well. 4 under, onto the tee, he was 2 in front. At that point, it looked like the moment got to him. Missed that sort of 2-footer or just over 2-footer putt on 16. And I think that put a lot of pressure on that was not an easy putt on the 18th. And you could be given for missing something like that in isolation. But the fact that it happened after missing 16, I think really stopped him out of contention, really. I
don't think it should be underestimated how difficult those putts are. They've got break, they're slick in terms of the speed, but you do expect professional golfers to make them. And I think this is the thing about Pinehurst. You were never safe. There was trouble lurking everywhere. There was trouble lurking in the waste areas. There was trouble lurking around the greens. There was trouble lurking on the greens. And it made you hit the shots right to the very 18th hole. And Rory had the 2-shot lead on, I think, as he stood on the 14th tee, and allowed himself to think, right, I've got this one. And it came back, the course came back and asked him to hit those shots, and particularly those 2 putts. He wasn't able to close it out.
How did you think the course played? Like, there was a lot of talk about fairness and you're either loving the course or you really hated the fact that there was so much luck involved in the native areas.
I loved it. I loved every minute of it. And I like the fact that there were some birdies out there, because sometimes these difficult setups just give nobody a chance that's behind to make enough birdies to be able to catch up. I think that there was a great balance here where there were definite birdie holes if you played them correctly and you had that chance. But if you didn't play a hole correctly or if you lost concentration, it would bite you. And that was beautiful to see. I think it was such a breath of fresh air from the soft sort of dartboard conditions that we see week in, week out on the PGA Tour, that we saw for the PGA Championship. And even a little bit at Augusta of late. It's certainly not played as firm as it could. And the reason why I think the scores were lower this year had more to do with the windy conditions than it necessarily did the course setup. So I think it was a fantastic course. Pinehurst was undoubtedly the star behind Bryson. And if we had a rotation of US Open courses that had Pinehurst, Oakmont, Shinnecock, and maybe one other, that would be a sensational rotor.
I love this style of golf. It's very similar to Link's style, which pretty much is the majority of golf I play down here. I think what it does, there is a little bit of luck involved, but in most cases, when you get lucky in a native area, you still got to play a very good shot to be able to recover. I think what it does is it gives you the opportunity to play a really good shot and get out of trouble. Whereas you look at really deep, thick, rough, as a rule, everyone's playing the exact same shot afterwards. And there isn't a lot of skill involved in getting out of it, outside of, say, like a Brooks, who was able to, or Bryson as well, previously at Wingfoot, being able to handle and be just with pure strength. I think the native areas, from my perspective, it is still a shot you've got to be weighing up. And if you get yourself in trouble and you've got the skill to be able to get yourself out of trouble, I think that is what it presents really well. A good example of that for me was Rory on 5. He ended up in a terrible position, but the shot he played, he had an iron in his hand for his second on a par 5, and the margin for error is relatively small. He didn't hit a good shot. His body language told you that straight away. He obviously mishit it. But the question I would ask is, was that the right strategy to be playing, given the margin for error is so tight? He could have laid up and had a much easier shot into the green.
He could have, and you're right. The second shot into that par 5 and where it ended up is being used as a case in point for this is unfair. That shot wasn't that bad, but look at the end result. I'm okay with it, like you, and all of the players are playing that hole in the same setup and in the same conditions. So I didn't have a problem with it. And I don't necessarily think Rory'd have a problem with it. He knew, as you say, he didn't quite get that 5 iron in, and he paid the price. Where it finished in the depression of the sand actually in the waist area was probably the most unlucky part of it. But we saw hundreds of balls roll well and truly away from the intended target because they missed their landing spot by a couple of yards, and that's just the way Pinehurst is. So I didn't have a problem with it at all.
Worst loss, this one or the Open in 22?
It's hard for us to say. Only Rory can truly answer that. The reason why the Open loss I thought might have been worse was because it was somewhat on home territory over there. I know it wasn't an Irish course, but he just had everybody going for him in that final round. He had a 4-stroke lead where he was coming from behind here. So I felt like maybe the 22 Open might have been worse, but seeing him in that scoring room afterwards and his reaction once he saw Bryson hold that putt, you'd think maybe it could be this one. Having said that, I do think we should just call out that Rory's got a shitload going on in his life at the moment. He's got a on-again, off-again divorce that's been happening, so he's trying to mend his situation. he's had this heartbreaking loss. He's had all the stuff around LIV and the PGA Tour conflict that he's carried a lot of the burden on. So I'm sure emotionally and mentally he's pretty spent and pretty taxed. So probably can't judge him too hardly for what we saw afterwards, but maybe some of that stuff is also contributing to him taking this loss in a pretty hard way.
He is pulled out of the Travellers this week, which I think is a good thing. After the loss, I think I commented to someone on X that I thought that it would be great not to see or hear from him until Scottish at the very least, just to take some time away from the game, because he looks like he needs it after that. One thing, though, I must say is maybe he's put himself into this particular position, being on the board, pushing so hard for these signature style events, is that he probably has a little bit of a responsibility to be, as you say, fronting the media. He probably needs to be playing this event. So that's a knock. This is a situation which maybe overrides that. But last year we saw him skip a signature event after pushing hard for it. This is a second one he's skipping. There is no penalty for skipping events now, but I think from probably one of your biggest leaders on tour and biggest sort of mouthpieces, it's potentially a little bit of poor form skipping it from that perspective.
The signature events have been held out to fans and sponsors as these pinnacle events where you are going to get all the best players together playing in the event. And Rory is 100% one of those must-haves from a fan and sponsor perspective. So you've got people that have invested time and money getting tickets and corporate suites and the like, putting out sponsorship dollars for these signature events. Travellers would be expecting him to come, but for a legitimate injury. As you say, it's not isolated either. He's got form of doing it last year, and I think it starts to undermine a little bit the importance of the signature events if we were to see this continue.
I thought Cantlay was pretty good. He was still in the hunt, well into the back nine. He's another one that's sort of noted for his relatively poor performances in the majors, but he was relatively impressive. And the other one that you noted is Matthew Pavon, who was one of the only players that had beaten Scotty for most of the first half of the year. And he didn't have a great Sunday, but his overall performance in the major in those tough conditions was also very good.
Cantlay, certainly his best performance in a major, and he just hung around, wasn't doing anything particularly special, but it was still there if Rory and Bryson slipped up. So ending up there T3, I'd say he'd be very happy with that result, particularly as there's not been a lot to be all that up about in his recent form. Pavon has shown some decent form so far this year on the PGA Tour, although the lead up to it, it did surprise me that he was so heavily in contention. But congrats to him on a great performance, and finishing fifth in major or US Open at Pinehurst is a great achievement, and probably one to keep an eye on.
Anyone else either positively or negatively?
I think some of the people that missed the cut, noteworthy. So some big names there in terms of Hovland, Homer, Tiger obviously missed the cut, and maybe we should talk a bit about Zalatoris and JT. I think Tiger in his post-round press conference had said, look, this may or may not be my last US Open. He was non-committal. I would be surprised to hear Tiger actually admit this is my last, but I think it is becoming clear now that he can't be competitive at this level. He is probably more a ceremonial golfer now for these style of events. He'll continue to get exemptions for as long as he wants them, I would imagine. But it's just beyond him, I think, physically now to be in any sort of contention, and probably beyond him really to make the cut on a consistent basis.
Hasn't made many of them since the car crash. I think one thing he's always harped on about is reps, and he just doesn't look like his body can give him the reps required to be anywhere competitive in these particular events. Even when he come back prior to the crash, 2018-2019 period. It took him 2 or 3 events before he was sharp enough to really start performing, which time he had the breaks. And it just doesn't look like he can do that at all anymore.
It will be interesting to see. I think he said before that he doesn't want to be that sort of ceremonial style golfer, whether that's an admission he's prepared to make to himself and not play in these events going forward remains to be seen, but there's certainly a big question mark around that now.
The Aussies. So we had Min Woo finished in 21st. Scotty and Cam Smith were 32nd. Day, Davis and Jason Scrivener all missed the cut. What did you think of all the Aussies?
Look, Min Woo had a good final round and moved up the ladder. I think there wasn't too much to be excited about. Smithy, the wayward driver, just put him in too many difficult positions, and we were talking about this last week on the pod, concerned about his form leading in, so that wasn't a surprise to me. I was surprised that sort of Scotty played as well as he did, because I just really didn't think this course was a match for him. So to see him shoot the same score as Cam was a little surprising to me. I think I picked Jason Day as Australia's best chance and he didn't make the cut, so no point listening to me on those sorts of predictions. And then Cam Davis has not been in great form, and it was always going to be tough for Jason Scrivener, despite getting through qualification. It's a very different course to what he would see on the DP World Tour, and in our preview pod, we were talking about his form not being so great on the DP World Tour this year, so that didn't surprise me.
I think probably the main one I focused on was Cam Smith. He just doesn't look like his approach game or approach play is up to where it's been the last couple of years. That seems to have fallen away, and he's really putting a lot of pressure on his short game and his putting, which has been the putter has been a little bit scratchy this year as well. So it's going to be interesting to see if he can turn that around in time for Troon.
It's only a few weeks away. He definitely would have his eye on that. Will be interesting to see how he goes at LIV Nashville this coming week, and whether that's a sort of turnaround in the form and what he's been working on.
Yep. Now on LIV, we had 13 playing before Rahm pulled out. 8 of 12 made the cut. Sunday outside of Bryson wasn't a fantastic day, with a few of the LIV guys backing up. Hatton and Pooge, probably the main two that really backed up. They were looking pretty solid through those first 3 rounds. Sergio did well to finish in T12. Any other sort of notables there that caught your eye?
Sergio certainly was a surprise. As we know, he initially didn't qualify to get in, was on the alternates list and snuck his way into the field, and was in the top 10 there for, I think, a little while as well. So he was a surprise. I have to ask the question, what are your thoughts on Sergio's outfits?
The fireballs, they're bright, aren't they?
They're very bright, and then the matching shirt and shoelaces, it's a little bit kindergartenish for me. But Sergio's certainly putting it out there in terms of his outfits. Disappointed with Brooksy. I thought he might give it more of a shake. And DJ's the other one that I was disappointed in. Just really, his game is not where it needs to be. It's a long way from his best, and I think that's a great shame to see.
I was relatively impressed with Hatton through 3 rounds. I had picked him for the top LIV guy, which wasn't too far off really. I think he was +8 through that last round, which wasn't fantastic. Pooge's one has been really interesting because I can't get a read. I'm not exactly sure, looking at his stats. There's just not enough stats around him to see where he's so good. He's elite off the tee. That's very clear. His putter looks reasonable, and I'm just not sure about the rest of the game. But I'm looking forward to getting more data on him because he's clearly got something. But yeah, he just hasn't been consistent at that sort of top level, or particularly the LIV events mainly in the last 12 months. He had a couple of top 10s last year, and he's had the one this year. So I hope he can continue his form line and start playing quite well there on the LIV side.
It might be an experience thing too, and the good thing is that he's really grinding out as many events as he can to gain that experience, and he will have learned a lot, I think, from playing at Pinehurst and getting exposure to that type of golf in those types of conditions. So I'd expect his trajectory to continue to rise.
What did you think overall? Was it a success or a failure for the LIV?
Look, it's a line ball call for me. You've got one in the top 10. Obviously, they won. But outside of that, Hatton and Sergio, did they really contend? It was marginal at best, and then everybody else was just a footnote on the tournament. So obviously a great success in terms of Bryson winning, but I feel like it's certainly a win for Bryson rather than a win for LIV. Whereas some previous majors, it definitely would have felt like a win for LIV. So some of that tension's starting to dissipate a little bit in these majors, and the focus is back on the individual. But look, I'm probably giving it maybe a C or a C minus.
I'm maybe a little bit more positive than that, just because I didn't really have great expectations coming into the event at all. Not many were in great form there or on the PGA Tour, but so there's a pass, but maybe only just.
Maybe a C plus.
Yeah, you're right, exactly, a C plus. What would be interesting, I think, is seeing some of the other guys who have not really been. Christie is probably one that stands out to me. He's someone that generally steps up for these bigger events. So there's still some talent on LIV that are not getting major starts, but that looks like it's changing as well. Like the coverage of LIV guys on the Golf Channel, we saw Bryson mentioned in his Crushers outfit on the PGA Tour socials, which is, I don't know how far they had to go up the line to get that approved.
I think all the way up to Jay. Or maybe it's to Yasser now. Who knows? There's rumours of an imminent deal. We might be on the eve of a deal. But you're right. Certainly, it would have required a lot of clearance to be able to show that on PGA Tour socials. I'm also reading online that you can't get a Crushers hat ordered online for love nor money. So it'll be doing the merch sales for LIV a great wonder.
And apparently the ticket sales for Nashville as well. Bit of a surge.
Oh, really?
After Bryson. Apparently there's a bit of a surge after Bryson won. A lot of ground passes are sold out early. I think there's still some on Sunday. There's some hospitality as well. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the crowd is like there. Obviously LIV at the moment, it's growing. And I think to me, success for the LIV crowds and the broadcast is really just growth. Without having a network TV deal, I think both are going to be hard to even compare anywhere near a PGA Tour. So it's just constant growth. It's going to take a long time if LIV is to be successful. It was 5, probably 10 years really before.
A lot will depend on if there is a deal and how the two tours are planned to coexist, etc., and whether the schedules will be complementary or conflicting. But so far as the American audience and the American crowd is concerned, there's still a lot of work to do, but I agree with your comment that success is around growth and sustained growth in those numbers. Trying to compare the crowd, I think I saw something online where someone was comparing the crowd at Memorial to the crowd at LIV Houston, and it's just a silly comparison to make because Memorial's got decades worth of history and LIV Houston doesn't. And America is still largely a hostile market for LIV. So for them to be growth in crowd numbers is the right measure of success. And it seems that they're doing that. It'd be a good test to see how Nashville goes and to see if there's building support.
Aussie of the weekend was Grace Kim over on the LPGA, the Maya Classic. So she had a 5-shot lead going into the Sunday and ended up in a 3-way playoff with Lexi Thompson and Leah Vu, both of who we spoke about last week.
An amazing effort from Grace. She's still very young. I have seen her a couple of times here in Australia. She's played out at Royal Queensland before, at the PGA when they had the men and the women together, and I followed her for quite a few holes. So she's got a wonderful swing, very composed, very tempered, And it was great to see her really get her first look at what it's like to be in the lead, a 5-shot lead. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to get it done, losing in a 3-way playoff. But the thing that stood out to me was the way that she carried herself after the loss and the perspective that she was able to show in terms of her post-round interview, which, if people haven't seen it, they should really go and check it out, because I think she was very impressive in quite emotional circumstances.
Agreed. Mike Clayton has obviously got big raps on Grace. I think he's been on the bag a few times through her amateur career and even through her professional career when she comes out here as well. I believe she was a member at Metro, which is Mike is as well. So he's a pretty good judge of golfer, Mike Clayton.
He's caddied for Elvis Smiley as well, so he's seen a lot of good up-and-coming golfers, and I think there are good things in store for Grace on the LPGA tour, so excited to see her develop and grow.
It's great to see Lexi contending after announcing her sort of retirement at the end of the year. And Lilia Vu, I think it's going to be interesting watching her for the remainder of the major season, because she could really do some damage.
Coming off that couple of months hiatus from a lingering back injury, so she'll be looking to take this win and carry it through for the rest of the season. And it is good to see Lexi having some good form here. You'd love to see her finish on a high in terms of her career, and this being potentially her last season. Hopefully Lexi's able to keep that form going as well.
Now let's jump across to next week. I think that wraps up most of last week, really.
They were the two major events.
Coming off the back of, or on a 3rd week run on both the PGA Tour and LIV. So we've got the signature event, the Travelers Championship, and LIV Nashville, which is interesting that they're going up against each other before and after a major. I believe the Travelers has a field of 71 after McIlroy pulled out, so he hasn't been replaced in the fields. Of note, so probably, again, the sponsors' invitations. So we've got Webb and Adam Scott both getting another sponsor invitation, which is crazy. I must say a good one I'm looking forward to seeing again is Michael Thorbjornsen, after winning PGA Tour U, has received an invitation into the event.
Good to see that sort of graduation, shall we say, for him. You're right about the sponsors' invites to Webb and to Scotty. I guess they're not going to knock them back because it's free money, but it's just not a good look. And you would think that something that needs to be ironed out in the future.
It's crazy. Hey, speaking of Michael Thorbjornsen, so he bet out Christo Lampreche. It was pretty close between the two of them for the top position of PGA Tour U. Let's look at those guys this week. We've got Thorbjornsen in a signature event, and Lampreche, we're playing his second Korn Ferry Tour event after giving up his spot in the US Open. That's considering how close they were. They've now on complete different tracks for the next
paths.
For the next 6-12 months.
And no announcement about Christo going to LIV, so it still remains unknown why he turned pro and gave up his spot at the US Open.
I think it must have been so he could play that event. That event up against the US Open. It gives him one extra week to try and earn his status, because there's only 6 or 7 events left on the Korn Ferry Tour before finals. And so I think getting that extra run at it to try and get enough points to qualify now, because otherwise he's going to have to qualify either through sponsors exemptions on the PGA Tour, which is the same thing. Outside of the signature events, there's only sort of 4 or 5 actual events he could get a sponsors exemption in this year. So maybe he was trying to qualify this year rather than having to wait until next year to try and qualify in either the PGA Tour sponsors exemptions or the Korn Ferry Tour. But it was crazy that he has to make that decision.
It's a US Open at Pinehurst. Anyway, I'm not in his shoes making the decision, but just wonder whether it might be one he regrets down the track.
LIV is at Nashville. Bryson, I saw, is him and the Crushers are speaking on Wednesday. So he's obviously capitalising on his success, and he'll continue to put himself out in front of the media, which is good.
He must be going straight from Trump Westchester to Nashville. The Trump's hosting him there on one of their properties right now.
He looks like he's not just drinking the chocolate milk anymore.
I think Eric Trump was giving him a huge magnum of wine to pour into the cup. So fun times for Bryson.
Probably really of these two events, I'll be watching them. I won't be 100% locked in on either of them. But I think it was very interesting that both tours decided to hold their signature events 3 in a row. After a major, you'd think you'd want to maybe just step away and give everyone a chance to breathe, give the event a chance to breathe. Going to be interesting to see if this is a one-off or if they both do it again next year. But I don't know if it's a great decision again from LIV's perspective, putting an event up against the best on the PGA Tour.
The whole thing just feels very jammed on both sides, doesn't it? It feels like we need a breather off the back of Pinehurst. But here we are again with another signature event and LIV running up against it. So I think similar to you, I won't be locked into it the way that I may have otherwise been. But I guess you just never know. Something might happen and we might be glued to the TVs again.
The DP World Tour has the KLM Open. LIV is 25 million purse. The PGA Tour is a 20 million purse. The KLM Open is a $2.5 million purse.
Just a slight difference on that one. And also, I guess, a slight difference in the talent levels too, with the field and the KL Open sort of boasting Matt Wallace, Luke List, Danny Willett. I just see Laurie Cantor's getting a start there as well, so not required at LIV Nashville, and Rasmus Højgaard.
And then across on the ladies' side, they have got the KPMG, the PGA. So we've got a major there. That's at a Harley Country Club. The $10 million purse. There's quite a few Aussies in the field, isn't there? 7
Aussies in the field, so another strong contingent to fight out another one of the ladies' majors. The usual suspects in terms of Hannah Green and Minjee Lee leading the charge. But then we've got Grace Kim, Sarah Kemp, Steph Kiriakou, Hiran Naveed, and also Gabby Ruffles. A pretty solid showing there for the Aussies with a couple of good chances, and Minjee will certainly be hoping to go a little better this time round.
I'd be looking forward to it. I would love to see one of the Aussies. I think we're due again for Minjee, another Minjee major.
And also due some more Charlie Hull.
Yes, we're missing that. I'll tell you what, that's a pretty good twosome as well, isn't it? Bryson into Charlie Hull. That would make some good content on YouTube.
Yeah, so maybe given that Bryson's already done the Page. YouTube video, might do one with Charlie Hull.
Now, have you heard anything else on the deal between the PIF and the PGA Tour?
Look, other than just skimming through socials and seeing a couple of posts about it being imminent or we're on the eve of an announcement, no. So I'm still very sceptical about there being an announcement, and if there is an announcement, whether it's anything of substance. It just seems that there's been so many different vested interests and different motivations and objectives from the various stakeholders that pulling a deal together virtually has seemed impossible. But some people with some reasonable sources have been making these noises. And so it could be an interesting couple of days ahead if there's some substance to what they're saying.
Chipnuck was probably the one really that kicked off that discussion, just saying that they were potentially holding off until Tuesday just to give the US Open a little bit of breathing room. He is now with GolfWorks. Did you see that a few announcements on, is it the Fire Pit Collective decided to wind down and close up shop?
Yeah, My Golf Spy he's gone to. I think he's done his first write-up for them. So Fire Pit Collective no more. Chipnuck's just wanting to have a pen in hand or a typewriter at the end of keyboard at the end of his fingers and bashing out the written words. So I did see actually quite a good interview with Alan just talking about Bryson and his evolution as a person. And he spoke quite insightfully, I think, about that sort of journey that Bryson's been on. So Alan's certainly putting out some good stuff.
I think so too. He incites some anger, but I don't really understand why. He seems to put out relatively good, well-researched content, but don't think that's the case.
Phil might not agree with you on that.
Ooh, JT's another one. Is he? He's his guy. He keeps going at Shipwreck, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
LIV Adelaide. There's talk of a movement from April into February.
Which would probably mean that Adelaide will be the season opener. And that has been one of the things that I've been saying is why not open with your best event rather than having it 4 events or 5 events in. So that kind of makes strategic sense for me. I guess the flip side to that is, well, if you open with your best, where have you got to go from there? It's only down. And we've talked before about this is the real challenge for LIV, is to be able to replicate Adelaide in a number of the other markets around the world. So that's my thinking in and around the move to Feb. I think Peter Malinowskis, the Premier of South Australia, had been making similar noises. So it probably means that it is going to shift and it'll be there in February.
I wonder if that has any impact on potentially what the Australian Open does.
Who would know? We still don't have a venue for the Australian Open this year. So it'll be interesting to see where that all goes. But we'll have to stay tuned.
It'll be interesting even this year to see if maybe they postpone it or not hold it at all. I think there was talk of potentially not being held at all.
Which would be just a massive blow and a real loss to the Australian golfing calendar.
It's been like we lost the Masters a few years back. We had those three events that's obviously got on the calendar. So we've already lost one of those. And
growing up and loving golf as a kid, like the Masters was one that the Australian Masters was one that really got behind the gold jacket, and remember Norman winning it a number of times and it being there at Huntingdale. So it is a great shame for us to have lost that off the calendar. To think that we might lose the Australian Open would just be devastating.
That was the first pro golf tournament I attended in 2015. Bryson was out as an amateur. He finished second in that event. I think it was maybe on the 8th. He hit a big drive up the left side of the fairway, stuck under the gum trees and holed out, pretty much jarred it. That was incredible. He had a big crowd following him that day, and he's always been an exciting, engaging golfer. Yep. Hey, and then finally, I think since last week, we touched on it a little bit at the top with Rory's divorce being off, which is a positive outcome. But it's strange that you go and file for divorce and then less than a month later unfile for divorce.
Who knows what conversations are going on behind closed doors, but it does seem strange as an outsider looking in. If that's the best thing for him and his wife and his child, then certainly we would wish him all the best with that. I did note through socials that Amanda Balionis posted a series of photos of her and the girls enjoying themselves in the Hamptons over the weekend. So obviously CBS didn't have the coverage of the US Open. It was with NBC, so she was off partying and certainly having the time of her life. So if there's any truth to the rumours that there was something going on between the two and that Rory's maybe decided to go back to his wife instead of Amanda, well, it was certainly a big, hey, I'm doing okay post.
That's a good episode, Lukey. I don't think that's anything else. Yeah.
No, it's been a huge weekend. We're recording late here on Tuesday night, so I think we'll call it, and I look forward to being back for next week.
One thing you should do is go and check out Luke's newsletter, The Shank Show. We utilise Luke's weekly episode really as our rundown, to be honest. It's a good recap of the event with some funny posts that you may not have seen across the socials as well. So check that out. We'll speak to you next week.
Thanks everyone for listening.